Hey, Pete, how's it going?
Fantastic, Grant. Great to see you again,
It,
sir. Good morning, good afternoon. Yes, sir.
yeah, it's great to be with you again as well. Hey, I got to tell you, man, I love the stuff you're putting out there and the different white papers and documents that I've read that you've put out. I just got to reading about the one that's about exposing and disrupting the supply chain of the cyber criminals. And I'm maybe paraphrasing a little bit, but I wanted to just ask you a few questions. I thought it was a great write up, but I think it's funny. We talk about hackers, right? That's always kind of been this slang universal term we use, hackers. And the reality is they have a bit more specificity in their identity, right? I mean, maybe you can kind of clarify that. I mean, I've always learned there are some very specific buckets, but maybe you can break it down for us. And I think also, the scope, the scale, right? So we really can give our listeners an appreciation, and certainly in the write-up they can get more detail as well. But why don't you break that down for us?
Awesome. Thanks, Grant. Thanks for your opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote an article, and it passes through lots of hands, and it got tweaked up a little bit, and some folks in marketing add their little bits. But when we look at the name hackers, it can be used. Think about the old white hat, gray hat, black hat. There's actually conferences named after the black hat hackers, and the grays and the whites. I consider myself, pretty much a white hat hacker. I've done a few little things that have been kind of fun, but when you start moving into the gray and the black hats, those are where people are moving past the exploratory phase into the potentially disruptive. And then on the far side of the spectrum are the people that are out for financial motivation or competitive motivation, or nation state actors, or people that are trying to steal intellectual property, or in the worst case, of course, the ransomware hackers. So, and there's Grant, the article was really focused on, what are those black hat hackers? What is their motivation, and how a little bit do they work? But then half the article was really about disrupting them. How do we disrupt this huge criminal ecosystem that we are losing against? The stats are not good, Grant, for the customers that are not Checkpoint. The statistics are terrible. We're failing. We're seeing more ransomware. We're seeing more cyber incidents. We're seeing higher costs for ransomware. We're seeing more disruption. It's in the front page. And now even the U.S. legislature is looking at making sure that we recognize those breaches and make sure that we report them, because a lot of those breaches are happening in secret. So, but back to the disruption, that's really, and understanding the criminal enterprise, that's really the two main points of the article.
Well, so what do you mean when you talk about cyber criminal supply chain? I mean, what does that look like? Because I understand what a supply chain is, but how
Sure.
are you drawing that parallel in the cyber criminal
Yeah,
world?
it's true. We do understand our conventional supply chains. In manufacturing, there's the little widget that, you put a bunch of them together, you sell the big widget. In service organizations, labor is supply chain. Well, when you start looking at the criminal enterprise of hacking, that supply chain exists as well, because it's typically not just one person doing it. They have a group. And what's interesting is now these groups are forming either loose or even tight affiliations to each other. So let's talk about some of the groups that are in the supply chain. There's and some of these consist of hundreds and sometimes thousands of people. If we look at what's just happening with Lapsus and the Rebel Group, it's literally involving thousands of people. So it's there's people that write and modify code where they're taking hacking tools and they're making them better. They're testing them against VirusTotal and other tools, and those exploits are then for sale. So there's one group that creates and makes the exploits, puts them for sale. There's another group that's managing the targeting of the company. Here are some, businesses that might not have, all the tools that they should have, or they don't have 24/7 monitoring or whatever. And then they target those and they use those tools. And then there's still parts of the affiliation group that they sell access to. What was the purloined information? What was the intellectual property? Is that valuable? So an affiliate group will start monetizing the resale of that. Another affiliate group will monetize the blackmailing if they stole a company, company lists of users. They'll actually go to those users and say, hey, look, we have your name on this list.
Yeah.
What's it worth to you for not doing it? So that's the triple extortion malware. And there's other groups that are targeting, and this is really scary, and we're seeing this happen more and more. They're targeting internal employees that might be disgruntled, that might have an axe to grind, that might not have gotten a raise. Who knows what their internal reason is, but they're in there to, they're willing to, compromise their company for financial benefit.
Yeah.
So those insider threats are terrible, but that's what these affiliates are recruiting for those. And then finally, there's the money. Each ransomware attack is averaging a $6 million payout. And once that hits, Bitcoin or one of the other favorite tools, they have to launder it. They have to find people that can semi-legitimize it, and they're flipping it through wallets, and they're trying to make it very difficult for folks like the FBI and other to chase the money. And now the FBI has recognized their technical weaknesses there, and they've actually set up an entire group just to trace the money. So it's just like in our conventional manufacturing, in our conventional supply chain, you have to understand that there is a criminal supply chain of hackers all working together, sometimes loosely, sometimes, using the same ticketing system, for heaven's sakes. Hey, we just hacked ABC company. Okay, it's ready. You're ready for the east-west reversal, or the credential harvesting and the privilege escalation stage. Okay, now let's call in the encryption team. Okay, it's time to encrypt. And these guys are all working together, and we're failing because they're more organized than we are.
Well, one of the things I find really fascinating is how they've stratified, as you say, very similarly to our own businesses. And what you have is organizations that are focused on R&D and building the very best malware, building the very best ransomware. And then they're turning around and building a network of distributors, of executors, of partners that actually launch the attack. And then, of course, they've got some cooperation in terms of remuneration. So there's definitely money to be made. Clearly, when you look at the evolution of ransomware and how we went from the short-lived hey, I've got your data and it's encrypted, that became a zero ROI business. People, backed up, and, they quickly saw that you needed more. And then we saw okay, I'm going to publish your data now, right? So double extortion, and now it's going to partners. And as you mentioned, it's actually even maybe going after employees of a company, right? They're looking at anybody with ransom numbers from 50K to, 5 million, right? Or more. I think it's really fascinating how They've figured out how to squeeze more juice out of the same fruit quite effectively, and they've done it by specializing and being focused. Which leads me to my next question that has to do with the ever increasing, ever more popular ransomware as a service along the lines of what we're just talking about. You know, I know I read data that said ransomware in 2020 cost businesses some 20 billion, right? So huge amounts. Who knows what it is in 2021 and what it will be with the 93, I think is the number I saw, 93% increase in the number of ransomware attacks that are occurring. So what are we really talking about? How do they go about conducting their business, and how much money? I mean, you'd already mentioned the average is like, what is it, 5-7 million something?
Yeah, it's like $6 million on the average. Yeah, so you're right. Ransomware as a service is a hot business to be in right now, because if you think about it, there's very few consequences, and the money's big. These gangs are in places where we have no extradition, and even if we do identify them, and whether it's by security researchers identifying them, or the FBI or Interpol, there's the long arm of the law, doesn't reach over the border. So these folks are, buying bigger boats and doing, expanding their enterprises. So, just like we have everything as a service, email as a service, Salesforce as a service, cloud as a service, this ransomware as a service is growing because there's so much money in it, and there's not as much, the criminals aren't being caught. So the upside is huge. So, these ransomware franchisers, think about it, what they're doing. They have call centers that are providing ransomware collection. They're selling encryption toolkits, and they're collecting a percentage of it, and then they're doling that money out in a fair way to where they have repeat. It's a repeatable business. So it's not just one and done. They collect their money, they distribute their money, their big heist. No, this is an ongoing criminal enterprise that has, and they're targeting, that's the other thing. They're targeting customers, or, customers, right? Companies like healthcare and transportation and some of the citizen services that don't have perhaps all the protection, and downtime to them is extremely expensive.
Yeah, they quickly moved away from the individual, because that was a zero-sum game too, right? And now it's almost exclusively on businesses. And you're right, many times they go after the weak in terms of less sophisticated, less mature, less comprehensive in terms of their overall position to defend.
They want to find people that are likely to pay.
Yeah. But I think it's important, right? People need to know there are tools today that, in fact, can protect you against ransomware, right? I mean, it's not a zero-sum game where you're going to get it no matter what. If you have the right tools in place, in fact, you can avoid getting caught, right?
Anybody that's done any kind of penetration tests or vulnerability assessments, we all know that given enough time and given enough money, any company, any place is hackable. We've seen that even with air-gapped. We've seen it against our government itself that has all the money that they need. But what we're trying to do, what those companies should be trying to do, is make themselves strong enough to where the hackers move on to where there's easier targets. It's the old joke of I
Yep.
don't have to be the fastest one in the group. I just need to be faster than
Right.
the other.
Right. When the bear's chasing you.
I
Yeah.
just need to be faster than my buddy.
Yeah.
So, that's the first thing to think about. But when you're really, you know, you don't want to necessarily be the tallest midget in the room, right? That is what the old joke is too. But if you really look at disrupting the supply chain, you have to look at a comprehensive strategy. It's not just you're not going to buy one tool and be fixed. You're not going to hire one person and be
Yep.
fixed. You're not going to increase your budget by a couple percent and be fixed. It really is a strategy, and it's a strategy that if you look at, first off, you have to know what your weaknesses are. You have to think like a hacker. You have to hire those kind of pen testers or vulnerability assessors that can look at your environment and look at your partner's environment. So it's not just your periphery and your connections to the internet and how distributed your workforce is, but it's who you're connecting to your partners. Who do you have
Yep.
access to your data? Who do you allow API connectivity to? Who do you allow to scrape information? All those types of partnership activities, because we're seeing, the hackers targeting those partners, and they're doing, when they target people like SolarWinds and Kaseya, those companies are relying on that supply chain for their IT tools, and they're amplifying their attacks when they hit one of those type of providers. But there's tons of different ways that you can disrupt it. You have to have your tools working together. We all know we have assets in the cloud. We have assets that are network attached in data centers. We have endpoints everywhere. We have BYOD devices. We have email that still is one of the number one vectors for the ransomware attack. So we have to have all those tools working together, and a lot of companies don't. They have a lot of single use tools. They have lots of different consoles. They have things that take too long in what's called the incident response or the ransomware playbook. And the problem with that is these gangs have automated everything from the initial penetration to the actual to the encryption of your data, literally down to minutes and in some cases seconds. It used to be before that if you'd see somebody knocking on your door, you'd open a ticket and you had a 30-minute SLA with your MSSP, and they'd start investigating and they say, oh yeah, we should block that IP. And everybody was kind of working at, regular speed.
Those days are gone.
Yeah, that's not good enough anymore, Grant.
No.
You have to work at machine speed.
Yep.
These hackers are working at machine speed,
Yep.
which means your tools have to have artificial intelligence. They have to be working together. They have to have an awesome threat feed. Because why should you be, when customer A of the ransomware gang attacks somebody with a new threat, and they turn those guns to you, why not have a threat feed that has already seen that, and in 3 or 4 seconds is updating your rules and your signatures and your block rules to where you're not even going to see that anymore.
Yeah.
So the final thought to answer your question is we've got to move away from a detection mentality into a prevention mentality. Detection is too slow. There's a lot of companies out there that still are having the malicious email delivered to their inbox, and while the sandbox is working. A lot of the companies still use those old gateway tools. You can't deliver the malicious payloads to the inboxes. You can't trust your end users to protect you from a ransomware event. You just can't deliver that crap into the inbox. You can't trust your training, and you can't trust end users. Sorry, there might be some smart end users out there that I'm offending, but I'm not offending. I'm trying not to offend the smart ones.
What's interesting, Pete, to me is as I step back, look at the last 10, 20 years and the evolution, we all started off with nothing but the best of intentions, and it was all based on best of breed. And the number of segments, if you will, facets within security is pretty minimal. And we've all seen the graph and chart today. It's quite extensive, quite elaborate, and there are numerous 20, 30, 40 different categories, maybe more, where there are products. And so we grew up in this world where we created this fabric, but it wasn't a unified fabric. It was arguably a siloed fabric. And this is where the bad guys seemingly have stayed ahead of us, because we all carry a supercomputer around with us, and it's connected 24/7, 365, just like the laptop our company issued us, although I bought this at the Apple store, right? And this is what, to me, it seems the bad guys have still successfully eclipsed us on, and that is understanding our siloed approach is our Achilles heel, and it's killing us. Consequently, they exploit it against us. And the only way you can effectively protect yourself across this vast, hyper-connected fabric is with something that's unified. And we hear that now more than ever from vendor consolidation and the other new approaches, right? I want to touch on one thing, too, before I forget it. The legislation that's now enacted. I thought that was quite fascinating, having to do with ransomware. First it's breach detection, and you need to report within 72 hours of you learning about it. There's still going to be that ferocious lag, right? We see it time like Colonial Pipeline, for example, JBS as well. So that's interesting. But now, within 24 hours, Pete, any organization in the U.S. anyway is required by federal law to report a ransomware payment.
It's true. It's absolutely true. And it's going to help. It really, it's going to help in a couple different ways. It's going to, back to the point right before the mandatory requirements, what we refer to that is technical debt, where we've made decisions that have a debt on the company. And hackers are the new technical debt collectors. They're looking for incorrect connections between those tools that don't work together, tools that are not integrated. And certainly, CISOs everywhere and security professionals everywhere, when they have a problem, they say, well, I need to fix that with a tool. Well, these days, there's comprehensive suites of tools that can fix a lot of problems.
Yeah.
And a lot of consolidation comes down. Security companies have bought multiple companies, and they haven't integrated into their console. We see that with a lot of the big players out there that, it's chair swivel, head swivel, different licensing terms and dates, and incompatibilities. And we're also seeing the root cause of, causing vulnerabilities in their products. Who wants to be a security vendor that has vulnerabilities in their products? And then we're seeing those that haven't been fixed in the case of one of our formidable competitors for over 300 days.
Yeah.
So the security vendors are actually becoming a vector for security issues, along with that ecosystem of unconnected tools, and that back to that technical debt. So, until companies start saying, look, we need to do a clean slate, we need to look at what we're trying to protect and who is best situated out there in the competitive landscape of 6,000 security tools out there.
And growing.
and growing because there's new stuff and new
Every
little
day.
bits of play. But who can solve most of my problems? And that's one of the reasons I'm so thrilled to be at Checkpoint, is because, we're frankly I think we're the oldest security company, with Gil inventing the stateful firewall
Yep.
and still at the helm. And we've bought some best of breed technologies, but every one of them have been integrated into an integrated single console. And it's not just a single console, but it's a hyper efficient console. We talk about consolidation, but we also need to talk about how efficient that consolidation is.
Yep.
And we have tools like the agony meter that shows how many clicks and how many screens that it takes to do
Yep.
routine tasks. And it's absolutely crazy how some of our competitors force you to look up error codes and check the manual to do this. And
Yep.
meanwhile, with Checkpoint, it's hyper threaded, and you just knock things out. And it really, the bottom line is, because this whole point of this discussion is disrupting. So just to the couple points that we've got to reinforce, it's move from detection into prevention. Consolidate your tools to where they work together. Call your security partner that, because Checkpoint sells exclusively through partners. Those partners have very sophisticated engineers that are ready to help, that are ready to look at what your vulnerabilities are and protect, those four things that you've got to protect: your intellectual property, your customer lists, protect your ongoing operations from disruption, and then finally protect your reputation.
Yep.
So
Ask
looking
about
at those-
Infinity.
Ask about Infinity. That's right.
Yep.
Our partners will know how to do that.
Well,
This has
Pete,
been fun.
I always enjoy talking with you. I enjoy, again, your writings. And so thanks so much for having this conversation today. Appreciate it. It was good to spend some time with you. Thanks a ton.
Well, you could tell I always have security on my mind. And Grant, you're always fun to talk to and get marriage advice from as a bonus.
Well, I don't know about that. But on that note, thanks a ton, Pete. We'll look forward to getting together with you again soon. Take care.
Fantastic, Grant. Take care.